Hello, sixth graders. We are in section 6.7, which talks about simple interest. Now, simple interest is different than compound interest, which we will learn next year while you're in 7th grade. So simple interest starts off with a formula. But before we talk about that formula, let's talk about what simple interest is. First off, interest. Interest is the amount of money that you paid or that you earned for the use of money. So for example, if you would go to the bank and you would deposit money into a savings account, since it's your money, you're going to get the interest. But if you borrowed money for, let's say, to purchase a car, it's not your money that you're borrowing. You're borrowing the bank's money. So therefore, it's not your money to begin with. Therefore, you're going to pay interest. Now, the principal is the amount of money borrowed or deposited. So here's your key idea. Your key idea starts talking about simple interest. Now, simple interest is money that you paid or earned only on the principal. So let's talk about compound interest for a second. If you would actually get a credit card when you're 18 years old, and you go to, let's say, Target, and you spend $500 on your credit card, and you don't pay all of it off at the end of the month. Let's say you only pay $100 off, which means you have a principal or a balance remaining of $400. Let's say your interest rate is 20% every month. What they're going to do is take a 20% of what's left, so 20% of the $400, and then they'd add that on to what you owe them the next month. But then let's say you only paid a portion of that. Then, at the end of that month, not only do you have your $400, or whatever's left that you didn't pay, but you have the interest from the first month. So you're actually going to pay a 20% interest of not only the principal, but also the interest that was already added on. In simple interest, you're only paying money on the principal, not the additional interest. So your formula is I equals PRT. I stands for the amount of interest, that's the simple interest. P is the principal. R is the annual interest rate, that's always written in decimal form. And time in years, notice in years, is what T stands for. Example number 1. You put $500 in a savings account. The account earns 3% simple interest per year. We're going to find two things. A, what is the interest earned after 3 years? And B, what is the balance after 3 years? So let's do A. A, I'm going to write down I equals P times R times T. So what are you starting with? Well, you're starting with $500. Well, the $500 is going to be your principal because that's what you're starting with. That's what you're putting into a savings account. The rate is 3%. So it's simple interest per year. 3% as a decimal would be 0.03 or 0.03. And time, it says after 3 years. And we want to find the interest. So we're going to multiply 500 times 0.03 times 3. And what is that going to give you? It's going to give you 45. Now, what is that 45? That 45 stands for the interest. Now, that's not what you pay. That's an addition. I'm sorry, that's not what you get. So, since this is your money, you're going to get this $45. So, A is what is the interest? Well, the interest is $45. But then, what are you going to have? At the end of 3 years, you're going to have 45 in additional dollars. So you add the original $500 onto that, which gives you a total of $545 after 3 years. So let's do example number 2. You put $1,000 in an account. The account earns $100 simple interest in 4 years. What is the annual interest rate? Now, once again, what I want you as 6th graders to get really good at, and this is the goal, this is your key. In 6th grade, your goal is to solve equations, to use algebra, to manipulate equations to get what you want. This is another example of an equation that's been given to you. You don't have to use this equation just to solve for the interest. You can use it to solve for P, for R, for T. It doesn't matter. So you're going to actually solve this for the interest rate, which in this case is R. So let's plug in our interest. We know that our simple interest is $100. We know that the principal, the money that's going into the account, is $1,000. The rate we don't know, and the time is 4 years. And now you just solve your normal equation. You multiply 1,000 times 4, that gives you 4,000 R. You do the division property of equality, which means I divide both sides by 4,000 to isolate the R. 100 divided by 4,000 would give us 25 thousandths. Well, once again, that's just a rate written as a decimal. As a percent, you would say that the interest rate, the annual interest rate of the account is 2.5%. So now we're going to once again use the same equation for interest, but we're now going to solve for time. So example 3. A bank offers you 3 savings accounts. Here they are, 1, 2, and 3. The simple interest rate is determined by the principal. How long does it take an account with a principal of $800 to earn $100 in interest? This is where you have to use some common sense and some other skills to actually figure out what you're going to use to solve this equation for time. So let's first write down our equation. It says how long does it take? So T is what we leave alone. We have a principal of 800, and we have to plug in the rate. But here's the problem. We have 3 pictures. 1.5%, 2%, and 3%. So which one of these 3 are we going to use? Well, it says right here, 1.5% is for less than 500. Well, we have a principal of $800. So that means we're going to get 2%. So 2%, do I just write 2? No. What do I write? I write 200ths because it's the decimal version. My interest is going to be $100. And now, you can pause the video, solve this yourself. If you did it correctly, you multiply and then you use the division property of equality to divide both sides by 16. You get 6.25. Now, in time, what is that? Well, that would be 6.25 years. You could also take a quarter of a year and also convert that to 6 years and 3 months. So that would also be acceptable. If you decided a fourth of a year is 3 months, 6 years, 3 months is also an acceptable answer. Example number 4, we actually are going to find an amount that you paid on the loan. So here's the problem. You borrow $600 to buy a violin. The simple interest rate is 15%. You pay off the loan after 5 years. So how much do you pay for the loan? So here's your violin. This is where it gets important because it's not your money. It is your money that you're borrowing for someone else to buy that violin. Notice that because it's not your money, the interest rate is much higher. And that's going to be true with anything that you borrow. If you borrow the money, you are going to be charged a good-sized interest rate. So, I equals PRT. So, what do you think I is going to be? Do we know what I is? No. What's the principal? Good, $600. That's how much you borrowed. What's the rate? So what do I plug in? The rate's 15%. What do I plug in? 1500ths, okay. And what's the time in years? It's 5. Now remember that it's not always going to give you years as well. It may say 6 months. It may say 18 months. You have to convert that to years. All right, so solve this. I equals what? Well, I equals 450. So what is that? Is that how much you paid for the violin? No. That's how much you paid to borrow the $600. So you have to add the interest back on. So if you add it back on, you actually paid $1,050 for the loan to buy that violin. Now, this last step is completely optional. But I would like you, if you want, go on the internet. Make sure it's okay with your parents, but go on the internet and see if you can find something about compound interest and see how it's different. Or better yet, tomorrow when you come into class, figure out what the formula is for compound interest and see if you can use it. If you can explain that to me, I'll be impressed. So look that up and see how compound interest is used and what formula is used to find compound interest.